Have you ever stopped to think about the nature of good and evil? We often think of them as simple, straightforward concepts, but they're actually much more complex than we realize. In fact, there are several paradoxes involved in trying to define and understand these ideas. So let's explore them together. The first one is called the moral paradox. It suggests that morality isn't just a matter of good versus evil. Instead, it's a much more complicated issue. This challenges the traditional view that there's a clear distinction between good and evil, and that good is always good and evil is always evil. There's no in-between. But what if this isn't true? What if good and evil aren't two separate things, but rather two sides of the same coin? What if they are illusions or constructs that society has created to help us function together in a community? If that's the case, then the question of good versus evil becomes much more complicated. It forces us to examine our own beliefs and values and where they come from. The second paradox is called the gray area. This idea suggests that morality often exists in a gray area between black and white, right and wrong. This challenges the traditional view that there's a clear line between good and evil, and that once you cross that line, you've done something wrong. But what if it's not that simple? What if there are many shades of gray when it comes to morality? People can behave in ways that are both moral and immoral depending on the situation. For example, stealing food to feed your family might be seen as morally justifiable even though it's technically a crime. Similarly, telling a lie might be seen as immoral even if it's to protect someone's feelings. The third paradox is called evil as a reflection of good. This idea suggests that evil may be the necessary counterpart to good. Without evil, we wouldn't be able to appreciate or understand good. This challenges the traditional view that good and evil are two separate and distinct concepts. Instead, it suggests that they're intertwined and dependent on each other. For example, we can only understand love because we also know what hate is. Similarly, we can only understand freedom because we also know what it's like to be enslaved. Even historical figures who are often seen as purely good or evil are actually more complex than we realize. For example, Nelson Mandela was imprisoned for 27 years for his fight against apartheid in South Africa. But some people argue that his actions also led to violence and instability in the country after his release. Similarly, Adolf Hitler, who is obviously a symbol of evil, was able to rise to power because of the economic and political instability of Germany after World War I. He appealed to the fears and prejudices of the German people and promised to restore their greatness. The fourth paradox is called the paradox of choice. This idea suggests that making a moral decision can lead to both good and bad outcomes, creating a moral dilemma. For example, choosing to save one person from a burning building might lead to the death of another person, who could have been saved if you had chosen to save them instead. This challenges the traditional view that making a moral decision is always good. It suggests that there are complexities involved in making moral choices, and sometimes we have to choose between two bad options. It also raises questions about the role of intention versus consequence in morality. Are you judged based on your intentions no matter what the outcome is, or are you judged based on the consequences of your actions, regardless of your intentions? The relationship between good and evil is much more complex than we often realize. There are several paradoxes involved in trying to define and understand these concepts, but these paradoxes don't suggest that we should give up on trying to be moral or ethical. Instead, they challenge us to think more deeply and critically about what it means to be good. They remind us that the balance between good and evil is never clear-cut, and that's part of the paradox. Morality is a continuous journey, not a final destination. It's a process of continually striving to do the right thing, even when it's difficult or unpopular. It's a process that involves acknowledging the complexity of the issues involved and being willing to confront the ambiguities. By doing so, we can become more aware of the paradoxes involved in morality and better equipped to make difficult decisions. There's no such thing as evil, or is there? If there is, then everything we believe about good is called into question. Because if evil really exists, then so does its opposite, which means what we think of as good may also be an illusion. Let's take a look at these ideas and see where they lead us. You're good. You know it, right? You try to be a good person. We all do, or at least most of us do. But have you ever felt like being good isn't as easy as you thought it would be? Sometimes we make mistakes, bad mistakes, and sometimes even when we mean well, things go wrong. Being good seems like it should be easy. Just don't do bad things. But as anyone who's tried will tell you, it's not always that simple. There's a lot more to being good than just not doing bad things. In fact, some would argue that the idea of good and evil are illusions, nothing but figments of our imagination, stories we tell ourselves to make sense of the world and our place in it. They would say that good and evil are not real, but simply human constructs, ways of labeling behavior that we find acceptable or unacceptable, right or wrong. This is a radical idea, one that goes against the grain of how most of us view the world. But it's an idea that's worth exploring because it challenges us to think deeply about what we really mean when we talk about good and evil. For example, we often think of good and evil as separate and distinct, as opposing forces in the universe. But what if they're not? What if good and evil are two sides of the same coin, two aspects of the same reality? This idea is explored in the writings of many philosophers, including Friedrich Nietzsche, who argued that good and evil are intertwined and that we can't truly understand one without the other. But it doesn't have to be a grand philosophical idea. Sometimes the gray area of morality is evident in our everyday lives. We all know that stealing is wrong, but what about borrowing something without asking? We know that lying is wrong, but what about white lies? We know that killing is wrong, but what about war? These are difficult questions with no easy answers, and that's the point. Morality is not always black and white. It's often gray and complicated, so if morality is complex and sometimes even contradictory, what are we to make of evil? Is it really the opposite of good, or is it something else entirely? Some would argue that evil is simply the absence of good. When we talk about evil, we're really talking about the lack of goodness, the absence of compassion, empathy, and kindness. In this view, evil isn't something that can exist on its own. It's always in relation to good. Something is evil because it lacks goodness, not because it has some independent moral status. If this is true, then it follows that evil cannot truly be understood until we first understand good. And that makes sense in a way. After all, how can we know what's evil if we don't know what's good? But it also presents us with a bit of a paradox. If evil is the opposite of good, then the existence of good presupposes the existence of evil, and vice versa. That means that good and evil are dependent on each other in a strange and unexpected way. But it gets even more complicated. Some would argue that evil is not merely the opposite of good, but its necessary counterpart. Without evil, good could not exist. This might sound strange, but let's think about it. Imagine a world without any evil, a world inhabited only by good people. What would that world be like? Would it be a better world? Not necessarily. In fact, a world without evil could be a world without anything good as well. Think about it. Good and evil are often defined in relation to each other. What we call good requires the existence of its opposite, evil, in order to be understood and appreciated. Without evil, the concept of good would have no meaning. This is why many religions and mythologies feature a cosmic struggle between good and evil, between light and darkness, between heaven and hell. The existence of one is necessary for the existence of the other. Sometimes being good can lead to bad things happening. You may have good intentions, but the outcome is not good. You made a moral decision, but the consequences were immoral. How can this be? Well, it's because the world is complicated. Human beings are complicated. There are so many factors at play, so many variables that can affect the outcome of our actions, that we can never be 100% sure what will happen when we do something. Even when we think we're doing the right thing, we can't always predict what the consequences will be, and that's why sometimes doing what we think is good can lead to bad things happening. And here's where the paradox of morality really starts to take shape. Making a moral decision isn't always easy. It often involves weighing the potential consequences of our actions, trying to predict what might happen in the future. But this is impossible. We can never be certain what will happen. We can only make our best guess based on our knowledge and experience. And even then, we can still be wrong. The world is full of moral dilemmas. Every day we're faced with situations where we have to make decisions about what's right and wrong, and these decisions are never easy. Sometimes there's no clear right or wrong answer. Sometimes the right answer is also the hard answer. Sometimes the easy answer is also the wrong one. We can see the paradox of morality all around us in the news, in our personal relationships, in the way our society functions. It's a complex, messy, sometimes even contradictory reality, but that's what makes it so interesting and so challenging. It's not always easy to be good, but it's always worth trying. If there is a paradox of morality, it's that there's no single answer, no one right way to be good. It's an ongoing journey, a constant balancing act between the forces of good and evil. The balance is never quite right, never quite stable, and that's what makes it so difficult, but it's also what makes it so fascinating. Being good isn't easy, but it's also not supposed to be. It's a continuous process of learning, growing, trying to be better. It's not about achieving a state of perfection. It's about striving for goodness in a world that often seems determined to pull us away from it. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification button to continue to receive thought-provoking videos like this.